Good afternoon, both to those who are privileged to be here presentially and also to those who follow us through streaming. This is the first afternoon session of the one-day conference on the Duke of Parma, and our first session will have as speakers Nicolás Barbosa, who is at the University of Bogotá, and Carlota De Feno, who will speak afterwards. Nicolás Barbosa is a visiting professor of Portuguese studies at Universidad de los Andes in Bogotá, as I mentioned before, under the Camões IP Cooperation Agreement in Colombia. He holds a PhD and MA in Portuguese and Brazilian Studies from Brown University and a BA in Literature from Universidad de los Andes. His doctoral thesis explores early 20th century drama and dramatic poetry in Portugal, Brazil, and Latin America, and he is responsible for the Spanish translation of over 20 Lusophone and Anglophone literary works in Ibero-America, and also the author of over 20 academic articles and book chapters. Nicolás Barbosa has also worked as a cultural advisor to the embassies of the US, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and the Netherlands in Colombia. And today his talk will be on the dawn of a Duchy, the Duke of Parma in Fernando Pessoa's dramatic corpus. We are very happy to have you here, Nicolás, and over to you.
Thank you, Jean Dionisio. Well, good afternoon and good morning for me. Thank you for the invitation. I can't see everyone who's there, but I trust that everyone is actually there. So thank you, and I'm going to speak. Let me share my screen. Please let me know if you can see my screen right now. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to speak, as you can see in the title, about the place that the Duke of Parma holds or occupies within Fernando Pessoa's dramatic corpus. To do this, I must also talk about the place of Pessoa's dramatic corpus within the author's entire corpus. So in the past few years, and also as a result of my doctoral dissertation, I have come to the realization that drama is really at the heart of possibly all literary genres and is therefore the seminal genre. The process of creative writing itself is eminently dramatic. It is an act of excision, it is an act of division of the self, and from there on, all genres of writing are the result of this act of play pretend that begins in an imaginary stage and results in the population and the dramatization of this stage. So this statement, which of course it transcends the purpose of this presentation, and I know it is debatable, but I hope that you can at least come to agree that in the case of Fernando Pessoa, it is at the very least a quite likely assumption. We all know by now that traditionally the study of Pessoa's work has privileged his poetry, and this has fed the perception that the Portuguese author is before all else a poet. And although different genres and different sections of Pessoa's archive have been increasingly studied and edited and translated, the dramatic production of this author has been traditionally disregarded or considered sort of an isolated instance or instances, when in fact Pessoa's drama is not only of literary and I mean quantitative and qualitative value, but also key, I think, to a comprehensive understanding of his entire corpus. So with this in mind, a few years ago, another Pessoa scholar and editor, Carlos Pitela, who is truly the stepping stone and the engine of this work. He and we began a project aimed at mapping a blueprint of Pessoa's dramatic universe. We began to establish an inventory of the total number of plays and documents in the archive. We started to analyze the dramatic categories proposed by Pessoa himself. We started to try to find patterns in form or in content that could reveal literary principles that might be crosswise to Pessoa's entire literary proposal. So this presentation today is a continuation or an update of that work that we began back in 2018 or 2019, and that we presented in a preliminary version back then in a colloquium organized in Lisbon before the publication of the Trilogia dos Gigantes. We've all seen, I'm not going to read this quote, but I think we've all seen and dare I say almost ad nauseam this all too quoted letter from Pessoa to his Gaspar Simões from December 11th, 1931, in which the author describes himself as a dramatic poet. And when embarked on this task of ascribing his artistic persona to a literary genre, we know that Pessoa not only seemed hesitant to fixate on only one, but he also elevated drama to, or as central to his literary journey. And paradoxically, this letter is among those most widely reproduced by scholars and editors, yet the acknowledgement of Pessoa as a poeta dramático has not necessarily led to the study and edition of his drama. Only recently, in the past few years, and in some cases for the first time, many of Pessoa's most well-known dramas have been published as full critical editions, in some cases simply published at all. And the past 6 years have shown an increase in the study and in the edition of Pessoa's theater. In 2017, Patricio Ferrari and Felipe de Freitas published Teatro Estático, the first anthology of Pessoa's 14 static plays. A year later, Carlos Pitela published the first critical edition of Fausto, and this effort was followed by the first digital edition, the project Fausto, uma existência digital, which was organized at the Centro de Estudos de Teatro from the University of Lisbon. In 2019, the Theater Studies Center at the University of Lisbon continued to address Pessoa's theater and published a digital edition of Trilogia dos Gigantes. We also see more recent publications in Pessoa Plural. In 2020, we published along with Jerónimo Pizarro, Rui Souza, Carlos Pitela, a critical transcription of Pessoa's dramatic poem Portugal in Pessoa Plural. And this journal has also seen in 2020 and 2021 the publication of the English, in fragments of the English play Marino, edited and studied by Carlos Pitela. Such recent editions, all these recent efforts, are of course the result of a tradition of notable exceptions. It is, despite the fact that, as I said, traditionally in Pessoa studies, drama has been ignored or considered isolated. There have been scholars in the past decades who have studied the dramatic sections of Pessoa's archive, and I think it is worth at least mentioning quickly some of them. It begins, of course, with the work of Teresa Rita Lopes, her study of symbolist drama 1977. Duilio Colombini, the editor of the first attempt to edit, at least partially, Pessoa's dramatic version of Fausto in his edition Primeiro Fausto, and then Teresa Sobral Cunha, who also continued this attempt to edit Fausto in Fausto Tragedia Subjetiva by the late 80s, and whose work was also pivotal for the critical edition that then Carlos Pitella published in 2018. Other scholars, such as Antonio Quadros, with his edition of Ficção em Teatro from the 80s, David Jackson, who published Adverse Genres in Pessoa, and has this study of O Marinheiro and of the theater of immanence. While João Dionísio also published, for instance, early fragments of plays such as Marino. More recently, Flávio Correia, in his master's and PhD thesis, he worked on Pessoa as a playwright, specifically focusing on the static theater and the idea of anti-theatralization or de-theatralization in Pessoa. So these are just some names among others who have approached some of the plays or the dramatic poems that comprise Pessoa's dramatic corpus. However, most of the plays, or some of the plays, remain unpublished to some extent due to a lack of a standardized data or inventory of the dramatic writings. And in order to attain a more comprehensive look of Pessoa's entire corpus, including today's more canonical sections of the archive, Pessoa studies, I think, must also illuminate the more obscure sections. And this task begins by understanding what, how much, and in what way needs to be illuminated in order to realize that drama is not an isolated accident, but rather coherent fragments. They are fragments, but coherent fragments of a lens that I think determined Pessoa's entire work. A genre at times of experimentation where the author developed a philosophy, a literary stance, possibly crosswise to the entire work. How much drama is in Pessoa's archive? We all know that there are more or less than 33,000 documents, including lists, including publication projects, and drama with about a little bit over 1,000 documents might seem insignificant. But when we realize that drama represents about the same percentage, at least in terms of quantity, as the heteronymic poetry, we realize that the quantitative significance is not a reliable basis for to determine the qualitative significance of the dramatic genre in Pessoa. Of the percentage that interests us, so out of this 3.2% that drama represents, that constitutes the slice, if you will, of drama within the Pessoan archive, we can see that to date, approximately 59% of the documents have been published, more or less 617 documents. And the exact numbers may vary because, as you can see in the parentheses, this, for instance, includes lists and projects where some of the plays are mentioned. So it depends whether you count these documents, these manuscripts, where the project is being mentioned as part of a list or as part of a project or not. But we can say that approximately 59% of the documents have been published to date. More or less 617 documents, that is the bar that you see in yellow. And if we look at the rate of publication before So before 2018, the percentage of published drama in critical editions approximately is below 20%. But then in 1 year, in the period 2018-2019, this percentage grows to almost 42%. And to date, it reaches almost 60%. So most of the publications have seen the light only in the past 6 years. And that is a very interesting, a very important trend for us to consider. With the addition and with the publication of the Duke of Parma, the percentage of published drama would go up to around 75%. That is, well, almost more than 15 percentage points, which can work as a big number to motivate the huge work ahead that we will have. But a number that also signals how crucial the Duke of Parma is within the overall dramatic writings of the Pessoa archive. So how has the drama that has been published, how has it been published, is another important question that also reveals some interesting trends, editorial trends or scholarly trends in the past years. So to date, as I said, we have a totality of documents, of manuscripts of published drama that represent around 617 documents in the archive. And out of the totality of documents of published drama, excluding the lists and projects, critical editions, print critical editions, make up for more or less 16% of the publications, both print and digital, and I'm referring basically to Fausto in this category, as you recall that I mentioned earlier. 2018 saw the publication of the first critical edition by Carlos Pitela, but also the digital project of the Centro de Estudos Teatrais. So this makes up for almost 42%. And then we have exclusively digital editions, like the Trilogia dos Gigantes, or others that have been published digitally, Marino, Portugal, that make up for around 38%, and non-critical editions, other looser publications that make up for almost 3%. And this is important to realize something that is very evident from this graph, which is that digital publications have played in the past few years a crucial role. If we sum up the digital, the yellow, and the both print and digital, the red, we see that slightly over 80% of the published drama so far is available online in digital editions. In terms of language, about 2/3 of Pessoa's drama is written in Portuguese, while the rest is written in English. We could also include in this list, I didn't include it, a few documents, for instance, in French and complete translations into French of O Marinheiro, for instance. Pessoa wrote, I think, around 6 different versions in French of the first couple of pages of the play. But this is important mainly to understand that the Duke of Parma belongs to a group of English plays that are not an isolated instance in the archive. They comprise a considerable amount of dramatic documents, and as we will see, out of this slice of English plays, the Duke of Parma is also the most significant, at least in terms of quantity. So if we see the numbers, which is another element, another eloquent criteria, the number of documents per play, we can see that, for instance, the Duke of Parma is among the most, as I said, the most copious or lengthiest among the English plays, and among all plays is one of the lengthiest. We also see that of the 7 lengthiest plays in the Pessoan archive, which you see here. And the colors, the ones in blue, mean that they have been published. In total, well, we see that there are 3 at least written in English, Duke of Parma, Prometheus, Marino, which in total sum up to 323 documents. And we had said that the dramatic documents in English summed up to more or less 333. So we have a very small number, about 10 or so documents, which are not represented in this graph, which are not among the plays with the highest number of documents. And those documents come mainly from the Comedy of Fools, which has very few documents, about 4, and 6 documents that actually belong to Fausto, that are in English. So this means that from all the English plays, almost the totality of them are also among Pessoa's lengthiest plays, which shows also that almost the totality of Pessoa's English plays or English dramatic documents are still unedited. So to put it into perspective, the totality of Pessoa's static theater in terms of quantity of documents represents less than half of the totality of English plays. When we started this work a couple of years ago with, when I started it with Carlos Pitella, we started to compile as well some of the lists of dramatic projects and the labels or the dramatic groups that Pessoa ascribed to these lists. So we started to compile a document with the definitions that Pessoa wrote about different aspects of drama, the parts of drama, or the types of drama, or the purpose of drama. And based on that compilation that we began to work on in a very raw Excel sheets, but based on that, we proposed a couple of years ago some categories or groups of plays within the archive that I have varied slightly over the past, few years, and I want to go briefly over these categories that are represented throughout the entire archive. I would say there are at least 8 groups of plays. So there's the static theater, which is possibly what we have come to know best. We know that this is a group of 14 plays that encompasses more or less 21 years, from 1913 to 1934. We have a totality of 103 documents in Portuguese, written in prose or in dialogues, but not verse. And in the parentheses below this slide, you can see the list of most common words in these plays. Whenever this information was available or easy to extract, this is an exercise that I think is valuable, because it does give a sense of possible literary or thematic patterns in each of the groups of plays that I'm presenting right now. So here, the word sonho and the word dreams is thematically central to this specific type of drama. And as Felipe de Freitas and Patricio Ferrari, as they mention in their preface to their anthology, their critical edition of the Static Theater, these plays were written throughout 3 periods. So we have the first ones in the first years of the second decade of the 20th century, then 1914 to 1918, and we have a gap and a third phase of writing between 1932 and 1934. We have as well some non-static dramas, also written in prose or in dialogues, of which we have at least two, Amor, possibly written between 1909 and 10. It is, as you can see, a brief play composed of 11 documents, all in Portuguese, and the Comedy of Fools, satire and many things, possibly written between 1908 and 10, in English with barely 4 documents. It is worth pointing out that this transcription that Felipe de Freitas published from Amor, this is from Pessoa Plural in 2017, and also important to notice the more dramatic tone of let's say less lyrical, less static of this play as opposed to the static theater plays. Fausto, also written between in a range of several years. 1907 is the earliest fragment to 1933. It is the lengthiest play with 264 documents. Almost all of it, as I said, is written in Portuguese, except for those 8 documents that I mentioned before that were written in English. And it is written entirely in verse, in a very, mostly in a very specific meter, the 10-syllable meter or the decasyllable, and some verses of 5 or 7 syllables, but it has a very distinct meter. I also did this exercise of finding the most common words to get a sense of the most common themes throughout. And you see that they actually are the theme of horror, mystery, of inebriation, which is also crosswise to the play. And this is one of the fragments introduced only until the publication of Petela's 2018 critical edition. The Trilogia dos Gigantes, these 78 documents in Portuguese, written between 1909, 1913, written in verse, composed of fragments, mainly from 3 main plays, Livor, Birareu, and Tifon, mythological plays that address common Pessoan themes like the mystery of life, dreams, the proclivity towards non-action. And as I mentioned, this edition is available online thanks to the work by the Centro de Estudos Teatrais and trilogiadosgigantes.com. Another interesting category is the autos. And this is an interesting category to me. These are, so the earliest manuscript is from approximately 1907, the latest being from 1932. So we can see a trend here of how all these categories are constant throughout several decades. More than representing exact chronological phases throughout Pessoa's writing, all these categories that Pessoa, or projects that Pessoa mentioned and to which he ascribed specific plays, are more or less constant throughout the first 2 decades, in the beginning of the third decade of the 20th century. So what is interesting about this category are the shifting attributions. The auto das Bacantes, for instance, that later becomes part of Fausto. But we also see the opposite. We see, for example, this fragment that was initially attributed to Fausto and then removed by Pessoa and becomes part of the Auto do Orfeu. And if you notice, if you take a look at this fragment, the meter really does not fit in Fausto's longer and perhaps more stable verses. The tragedies, where we have, well, a group that encompasses both Portuguese and English plays, where in which we would include the Duke of Parma and Marino, which is possibly the earliest document from 1903. This fragment, in fact, which was included in Jean Dionisio's edition of the English poems, now found in the Carlos Pitela's digital edition in Pessoa Plural from 2021. Also in both languages, we have dramatic poems ranging from approximately 1909 to 1924. Some of these have been published digitally and loosely, such as this fragment of Juliano Apóstata that Carlos Pitela published in Pessoa Plural. And in a different category, I've left Portugal Encoberto, that was published in 2020, more as an illustration. So to close this talk, I think this dramatic poem has it is a very good example of the continuum that I think exists between Pessoa's drama and other parts, and perhaps the most studied, paradoxically, the most studied and thought about sections of his archives, like the heteronymic poetry. We have heard in the past several times suggestions of a possible connection between some of the dramatic writings in Pessoa and the emergence or the creations of the heteronyms. We have heard, for instance, these allusions that compare the watchers, the three women from O Marinheiro, with as sort of an antecedence or a foreplay that announced, where Pessoa kind of announces this idea of depersonalization that then becomes a more concrete proposal in his Drama Ingente. But in Portugal Encoberto, it is interesting to see that we have this announcement also of what would later become Mensagem. And this announcement is done in dramatic terms. So it is interesting to see how one of the poetic texts that we have studied the most, that has been published the most, such as Mensagem, is also connected to a possible seminal moment that is influenced heavily by an idea of drama and of poetic form in verse that has also a dialogical form, and that has been also conceived, as we can see in the manuscripts of Portugal, also called at some point O Encoberto, in dramatic terms. So I think I'll stop there, and we can continue talking after Carlota presents.
Thank you very much, Nicolás. So, thanking Nicolás for this marvelous backdrop to the set of fragments associated with the Duke of Parma that have our attention here today. We move on. We'll have the opportunity to exchange some remarks, observations, and comments after Carlota's talk.